Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are concluding Ex Machina with Deluxe Volume 5, issues 41 to 50 and Special 4?
41 to 50 and the final special number 4, yep.
Great. I finally got that right. Just as the series ends, I get it in one.
It's just what was left, so that was just
right.
Do the math from
it was
there.
what was left, and this one I did finish reading digitally because the back fifth of a omnibus like that is a little cumbersome on the couch. When you're in the middle of an omnibus, it's fine.
It lays nice and flat, as you get towards the end.
Especially with a toddler writhing around at the other end of the couch. So I think where we should begin is, I think we've said this before. We said this definitely at the end of Paper Girls. I think even in the Creator Spotlight on Brian K. Vaughan before Paper Girls. And I just want to start here. Like, Brian K. Vaughan knows how to stick the landing. Like, regardless of the length of series, I think he always has at least some loose version of the ending in mind when he begins.
It seems that way, at least. It seems that way.
If not, he's quite the artist, because it would be very sneaky if he was like inventing all this as he goes, because it seemed like one of those things like Paper Girls where like a lot of the plot elements were time loops that were like, that would be quite the retcon at the end. Just as here, I do have my like little nitpicks with short-term setup payoffs, which we'll get into perhaps in some of the particular issues.
They're probably similar to mine. Now that you say that, just what the nitpick is, probably similar to mine. I think overall, I like how it ends from the political side, which is a side I think you and I in this comic are more interested in. I think my quibbles with this ending stretch is dealing with the superhero side.
Well, it felt like he had been sitting on it, and then just
unloaded on it.
It was just like splat.
Yes, yes. And I think
so. I felt that, but I also felt like, I'm not sure that's wrong, because he had teased it so long that I was starting to lose interest in the tease. And I even got annoyed with Hunter when he's fighting the guy who can give him all the answers. And he's like, every time the guy starts to reveal more, Hunter's like, God, I'm sick of hearing you talk. Which, like, I'm like, but the reader isn't, right? Like, I would actually like to hear the next sentence. We're one sentence away from getting all this crap mystery out of the way, because that's not really what the story's about.
Well, and I think that's what I bump on here, is that it's a book about a politician and his time as the mayor of New York and what he has to deal with. And we get some of that stuff here, him basically saying, I'm not running for a second term, meaning that I'm going to try to push all this stuff through in the last year. We get one final kind of hot button issue talking about abortion and Plan B pills and things of that nature. But the idea of the origin of his powers and where does it come from and what's this other thing? We know it's not alien. It's been hinted at. It's some kind of alternate reality, alternate dimension. That's on a multiverse situation that had been kind of playing in the background, and it was never the focus. And it got so much focus at the end, because I think you're right. It felt like they had this idea of what that was and how important that was to BKV and Tony Harris in terms of what the story was about. It seemed like it wasn't that important, but they clearly had an answer for it, like they knew what it was, and it was like they were trying to find places to put it in, and they got to the end. It was like, well, I guess we just gotta put it all here, just empty the notebook out and explain everything. And while reading it, for me, what they put out there, I'm like, if this were a superhero book, I like this. I like what they've done. I like that aspect of it. But at this point in the story, for me, because I'm more invested in Mitchell Hunter, the politician, the mayor, and what he wants to do with his next step. This, these ideations of Washington and the White House and all that. That was more interesting to me. That I wasn't in the right headspace to be like, and oh, by the way, there's levels to this supernatural to these powers, and especially when he gets down to the sewer, and he confronts whatever the purple bot is, the one that mimics McPherson's powers, talking to animals, the thing with the rats and all that. And when that after he exposes whatever, just the block that is the CPU there or whatever, and that thing starts talking about the spectrum and different colors. And when I read that, I'm like, oh, that's what Jeff Johns did with the Green Lantern Corps and the power rings, the emotional spectrum of, each color ring controls a different emotion. I'm like, this is something that's interesting. I like this. This is cool. But because it comes in a story where I'm not focused on that as a reader myself, it doesn't land as hard. But I can see a scenario where if this is what the book were actually about, I'd be totally into that. Because we see that, right? We see the green from from Mitchell. We see the purple from McPherson
and the white.
Well, we see the white eventually. There's hinted of the red with the crops, and if we go into the one shot that Jean-Paul Leon did, which I don't know what order you read them in.
I read 41 through 50, then the one shot, which was, I think, the wrong way to do it.
Yeah. So
you shouldn't end on the one shot.
Yeah. The way it's presented here, in the deluxe edition, that one shot comes in the middle of the two story arcs. So I think it comes after issue 44, I believe. Hold on, let me see here.
Yeah, that's a better experience either way.
Yeah, so after his encounter in the sewer, and so after you get this information about the quote unquote spectrum, and right after you see Suzanne Padilla, the reporter, right after she gets right after Bradbury knocks her in the head with the white box and she gets her powers, that's when you get the special about the gardener and him talking about, he thinks he gets his powers from Mitchell, but the idea that he can talk to plants, we don't see him do it, but you get a sense that maybe that's what that android machine was talking about, right? That was the red, talking about the crops. And so this idea that a different color gives you control over a different aspect of our society, that stuff seems cool to me. It just, because it kind of all came like a garden, like a water, like a fire hose right at the end.
But let me describe another dynamic about it that I think. So I think I would have accepted this if I didn't know that I was in the home stretch. If this were coming out in real time and this was ongoing and it went for another 50 issues after this, I wouldn't mind the exposition dump. But because when I'm holding the omnibus and I know that you're just kind of crapping this out before the end, I think that was what tainted it.
And
that's kind of unfair, right? That's you wouldn't have been thinking that.
That's unfair to the creators. That's a fair note on my criticism. Yes. Because if we got this now, and even if we went another 10 issues, let's say it went to 60, and you think that, okay, then let's say it doesn't happen to end the way it ends on the political side. You think, okay, there's still 10 more issues, and then there's 10 issues to get the explanation. You can play out that superhero aspect now, as opposed to getting the information and then getting the end of the story. I think that's a fair criticism on my part and any reader's part who may think the same way. And I agree, maybe unfair to the creators, because that the idea that because we know it's the end, and at issue 44, you may or may not know it's the end. I guess I would have to go back to the single issues and see when they announced it was. Well, the last solicit would have been definitely by 46, because you need at least 3 months in advance. But it's possible they could have said in 43 or 44 or something like that, hey, we're going to 50 or something like that. That I would need to check. But so that may be that definitely does. You're right. That definitely does taint my perspective in terms of how the story is being delivered to the reader, because it's the end. This is the second to last and the last story arc, and now we're getting this huge info dump. It's like, here are all the answers that we had about the origins of Mitchell's powers. That I think from the reader's standpoint, their mileage may vary in terms of how interesting they found that and how important they felt that was to the story itself. Again, I think the way that you and I have talked about it, it's been much more focused on how he navigates the political sphere versus his past, the superhero sphere. And then those collide at the end. It all comes to the present. And so,
and they have been intersecting
a little bit,
kind of sloppily throughout. But I think the thing is, if you were someone who wanted a superhero book, I think you would be disappointed in this book. If you're someone who wants a political book, I think you would like this book in general,
Yeah.
especially, given the medium. Like, I don't know that many people who read comics, the medium, and can't at least stomach some kind of superhero plot, right? I do know people who
Yeah.
don't read capes.
Yeah.
They'll just say that at a comic
Yeah.
shop. But I think a story like this, they're like, yeah, I kind of, especially the fact that he sucks at being a hero, I
Yeah.
think really
No.
like almost is like a little wink and nod to like, yeah, just because someone's like a skilled politician, or just because they get a gift, doesn't mean they're actually good at using it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
he's
The idea
clever at
that,
using it,
yeah.
but also, did you feel like there was a little bit of a shift in his character here at the end, or like, or perhaps it was just that we got a bigger reveal about him? I don't know. I feel like he was so much more cutthroat in the end, and you never find out for sure, right, if he manipulated the voting machines in order to get elected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I actually love the way they depicted that. That it was like, here's both people's point of view, and then the one person, you think Bradbury's like, I believe Bradbury. That Bradbury was like, no, it was to do this.
Yeah.
And then when she
Well,
pushes him on it a little bit, he's like, I don't even care if it was true. And I was like,
yeah.
oh, well, that would suggest to me that he doesn't believe that he wasn't tampering with the
But
election.
I think Bradbury does believe that because Mitchell told him that. And the question is, because what does Mitchell say? Like, this came to him in a dream, right? He built this thing
Right.
basically as most of his inventions, the ideas
But
for
what
his
else came
inventions.
to him in a dream? His
Yeah.
little bullcrap button to mute his powers.
Which
That was a
wasn't
total lie. I mean,
well
that was a big reveal.
that wasn't a dream.
I thought he said he got that schematic in a dream or something back when they
I think
introduced it.
that one was just he needed to mollify Bradbury and Kremlin somehow. But like his ray gun, which also ended up turning into the way to open portals. But like that design came to him as dream. The jetpack, all those ideas came to him from a dream. Then he goes to Kremlin to get the parts for it to make it. And when it comes to the white box, we're not given anything to suggest that in that moment when Mitchell tells Bradbury about the box and tells him what to do with it, there's nothing to suggest that anything Mitchell's saying is a lie, not to Bradbury right then and there,
Yeah.
we're not given anything and we're not showing anything afterwards because, in the moment as he's doing it, he's saying, I'm seeing this thing of like another attack. And actually, I think from context clues, you can say that's true because the attack was coming from the other dimensions, the dimension that sent this stuff, the dimensions that wanted to make the white box. It was that he misinterpreted what the white box is for. This box was to control the people to then facilitate this attack. He didn't know that. So he's pulling these pieces here, these incomplete pieces. So I without any other evidence, I choose to believe that in the moment, Mitchell believed that this thing was meant to protect the people and to protect the process. And thus, because he believes it, Bradbury believes it. Although we have further context that the white box, that that power was meant to control human beings. Then that's like actual mind control. So it is. But I do guess though, what's left ambiguous is if the box did have influence that Mitchell and Bradbury didn't know. So did they manipulate the voting machines for him without them knowing it because they were bringing this box to places to protect them?
He didn't even need that. I think he would be able to tamper remotely since he had a fake power dampener.
But they put him in a like sensory deprivation tank, which is, I guess, different than the fake damper he gave to Bradbury and Kremlin. The idea is he is actually secluded in a place where he can actually hear and get no input. So I think that's where he was on election day. So I think that is meant to believe in terms of from Mitchell's standpoint that actually works. He's getting no input there. But yeah, of course, the idea is he obviously could tamper with machines. That's the whole idea why he agreed to go into Century Deprivation tank. So
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I like we've spun all around, but all this said, I do think he stuck the ending on the series very well because I I think it was a satisfying ending, not a happy one, but it felt like we got to see a little revelation, a little growth, a little movement from the character to the point where it was like you moved the story to a place where it could not keep going the way it was. Like BKV did to himself what Hundred did to himself when Hundred said, I'm giving myself one more year as mayor. And then it's out. It's either on to bigger and better things or I'm just out because I
I'm
failed.
done. Yeah.
And I think Brian K. Vaughan kind of did the same thing with the series. It was like,
I can see that.
I'm going to make, like, we're killing Kremlin. We're killing his mom. He's leaving office. If this story were to ever continue, I can't keep doing the same New York mayor city of the week things.
Yeah.
It's got to go bigger and beyond or find a way to end.
Send Bradbury to jail too.
Send Bradbury to jail too.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, that's all like off screen implied.
Well, yeah, but you know the idea of him taking the fall there, yeah,
Right.
He's burned bridges with Commissioner Angotti because he put the suit back on, so all of his allies, everyone around him is gone now, effectively, there is no, I think from a character standpoint, there is from the Mayor Hundred, from the Mitchell Hundred as mayor and politician standpoint, I like where the story goes. We do get some fun, maybe not the right word, but some interesting revisionist history, about specifically 2008.
Well, I thought that was interesting that they teased it. Like when I flipped to that page, I was digital, so I didn't know how many pages were left, and it said Vice on it. I thought it was going to be like the like issue 40, where it was like, here's a little tease of what that story would be like if that one were going. But it was literally just the title page, which, if he were to ever come back to this story, I think that one is taken by the TV show, which is an incredibly similar vibe to this book anyway. Like
in a lot of ways,
it's cynical and jaded about politics. Although, okay, so let's go back to a question from episode 1. Is Hundred a good politician?
I think by the end of the book, he is significantly better than when he started.
Okay.
Yes. I think he's a better politician. I think he is someone who okay. From two viewpoints. If I were a citizen of New York, if I lived in New York under Mayor Hundred, I still don't know if I think he's a good politician. From an outside person reading it, I think you see that he is better at his job now. And I'm talking about like the little things, like being able to give press conferences and not losing his cool, dealing with the press and things of that nature, handling some of these crises and seeing him also handle them behind the scenes too.
Sure.
I think he's better. I think he's better at navigating those waters than he was when he started. He was still very green in the way he reacted. You see that he can have a short temper with people outside of the office and as the great machine. I think you see him get a better handle on that. So I think he's a markedly better politician. Now, again, if you're asking if he's someone if I would vote for or support, that's a different story. But as someone navigating the political waters, I think he's better at the end than he was when he started. What do you think?
So I'll go back to the same distinction I made in the first one. Is he a skilled politician, like skilled in the art of politics?
Yeah.
100% agree with you. He has become a much better politician.
Yes. Yeah.
By the end. Is he a good person? No. Increasingly, he is willing to do whatever, pull the trigger, cross lines, more so at the end than he is at the beginning. However, would I vote for someone who laid out like, here are 4 things I'm going to do and a fixed timeline. We're going to balance the budget. We're going to raise taxes on the rich.
Yeah.
We're going to pay for this. We're going to pay for this. We're going to increase the graduation rate by 5%. And he does all that by the end of April.
Yeah. Or at least, he's
because he was getting ready to throw out the first pitch for the game. He's like, we pretty much did all that already.
Yeah.
It's like, holy crap, like assuming those were the things I wanted done, yes, you would have my vote. I'd be
Yeah,
like, oh, he's not nice to his mom or whatever, I couldn't have a beer with him, don't care. He
yeah.
listed the things I wanted and then he did them in the time he said he would do them. I would be all over that if anyone could ever, actually live up to that.
Well, if there also that also does seem to be have like your mayor has a lot of unilateral power there, because I would imagine that any mayor in any major city doing that would have some level of pushback from city
I
council.
did think about researching, like, can he just decree taxes? Like, yeah, I'm going to increase the marginal tax rate effective immediately.
Effective
I'm like,
now.
yeah, like the money will be spent by April. Like that's how quickly we're going to collect this.
Yeah. So maybe some nitpicks on the political process there, but I would agree with you if a politician said that, and I guess really taking the risk there, being like, I mean, well, someone in that press conference was like, how are we going to do that? And he's like, by raising taxes, like a lot, which is like, which is the thing that no politician ever says, right? Every politician that is like, we got to raise taxes, it's always a reluctance.
Yeah, it's like the same. It's like if Bernie Sanders tells you, like, how are we going to do this? Raise taxes, you will believe him.
Yeah. But what I'm saying, but no one ever says that. And Bernie Sanders holding a national office hasn't happened. We're talking about,
right.
But someone in that position, anytime they raise taxes, it's always a reluctant, listen, we have to do this because these are essential things, blah, 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 blah. And he's just like, and
even then, he called it a necessary evil.
He did, but he flat out says, like, we're going to do this, and here's who's going to get taxed. Here's what it is. Yeah, we're taxing more on the higher, all this thing. He laid out this, which again, there is this centrist pipe dream again, right? This idea of like, if you had the candidate who had no affiliation out of the party and could just get stuff done, could say the thing that the regular people want, it's gonna benefit the most people, which is just the most regular people. This is the kind of person this is the kind of politician you would see. Again, this is the kind of political idealism you would see on something like The West Wing. And I think there were a number of situations in this last arc when I came up on a lot of West Wing things. Way more parallels here. I think because of that kind of political idealism, the idea of this is the last job you'll ever have, so throw everything at the wall. In the second half, the second storyline, the final storyline that deals with abortion, and not really abortion, really just like
morning after pill.
Yeah. What are you 486? I believe it was.
Yeah. Which
I only know because of that was Manchester part 1, right? Part 1 and 2. That was season 3, so that's like 2001, where that's a specific storyline, and that drug is called out specifically. Are you 481? I when I see that, it jumps out at me because I've seen that episode of The West Wing, that double episode of The West Wing. And in that episode of The West Wing,
you never even know what it's about. It's just a shorthand. You're literally saying, "Are you for 81 or are you against it?" And it was just a clever. Sorkin, I think, was using it for like a little bit of wordplay. It's like, it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is Josh messed it up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you do know it's a morning after, it's a Plan B pill. But again, it gets tied into the abortion debate because the whole idea that abstinence is the only way to go and things of that nature, which they cover in the book here. And when I got to the end here and they started talking about, at one point, Wiley straight up asks Mitchell, like, you're pro-choice, right? And it hit me like, wait, this is the one kind of hot button issue that we hadn't had yet,
right?
In terms of things they covered, and I was almost shocked that maybe they were waiting for the end to hit a hot button, but that seemed like one that you could always tee up right up there with just, terrorism, racial profiling, racism, things of that nature, with marriage equality, the some of the things that they tackled early on in the story, the very obvious hot button political issues, that the idea of, again, not directly abortion here, but the idea of just that the entire debate that gets wrapped up around pro-life, pro-choice, that is something like they kind of saved for, we're going to end on one we know is like, hits all the, kind of hits all the right/wrong buttons for discourse. But it shocked me a little that like, oh right, this is the one we hadn't
like
hit
how
yet.
has this not come up?
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
politician in that timeline.
Yeah. Why wouldn't this have been one of the early ones? Because it's the one that always comes up in a political debate, political commentary, political show. It's something it's an issue that never goes away. And it
Although
does
it's
seem
one of
like
those issues that I think if you're like in New York or California, I think it's one of those that even your Republicans are indifferent or at least will just shut up about it. Like I think a New York or California conservative knows I'm not going to collect any points on this. There's no base around this issue that I can collect, so we're just going to leave it out of the debate. So I
we're
think
going to focus on the other right wing part,
the
kind
fiscal
of
things,
or
military or
policing, cops, Second Amendment, things like that. Yeah.
So anyway, I was like, I kind of bought that in this city it would not have come up.
I guess I could see that from the real world standpoint. I guess I'm looking,
but how the people around him would have never talked to him about it. It's like this is all these people do and talk about and think about.
And I think maybe that's what it was when Wiley was like, when he asked the question, like so implying
and the Catholic Church when he went to the Vatican called him on this issue.
Yeah.
They were like, "How come you haven't done anything about this?" And he was just kind of grumble. He didn't say like, "Oh, I'm actually with you. I just don't have the power to, what." He just was like, "Yeah, take your shots at me." But I think he almost had a sense when he was in the Vatican, where he was like, "You're not a New York voter. I don't care."
That is true. Yes.
It was like he has no interest in discussing ideology with someone who can't either move the gears or vote for him.
Yeah.
And he was like,
that is definitely true.
Having this debate here does nothing for me.
Yeah.
Like I only have ground to lose. There's nothing to gain. So I'm just, you say whatever you want about me to my face. I don't care. I'm not going to engage, not going to talk about it. That's kind of a baller move at the Vatican. And I do think that was one that took incredible restraint, which we're saying, first couple trades, maybe he didn't have that kind of restraint.
Yeah, I think that is the growth you talked about in terms of what from a character standpoint. Yeah, early on, if he's provoked, we see him when he gets provoked, by the press or some heckler or whatnot. Like he can't help but fire back. The when he goes on the radio show, right, and that talk show host corners him on the death penalty. And instead of kind of politely disengaging. Right. He basically literally just shuts him straight down, like calls him out on it and storms out. So, and now maybe it's a different thing because that is in New York. He's talking to voters, but still the idea that he couldn't have found a tactful way, a politician's way out of that, when now I think where we see Mitchell at the end of the story, he would have found another way to get out of that. And then maybe privately, not on hot mics, kind of tear that guy down.
Right.
But live on the air, he would have more sense now as to how to a little more gracefully exit that conversation, to where do the political thing of not make anybody mad on the other side,
Well, especially since he has the literal power to go off air anytime he's like, if he's on a radio and the show and doesn't like the question he just got asked,
cut the feed.
Yeah. It's like cut the feed. And all of a sudden it's gone.
Yeah.
So, so like we've kind of gone scattershot here.
A little bit.
So that first arc, let me get my bearings here. 41, that was what started with him fighting Fearson and the kind of the backstory thing.
Yeah. Reminding people about McPherson to control the animals, and then we see the rats come in,
right.
and then
bring out the old. Yeah, that's what that one's called.
Yeah. And so it's him going down in the sewers, but again, the political side of that is him announcing this, I'm not running again, and also pointing to.
And the hero side of it is him crossing the line into suiting up again.
Yes,
which
we see how quickly Angotti turns on him, right? Later on.
Oh yeah. I mean, and she like
they're
warned him.
they pull it with bows and arrows because they know the one thing. There are many things he
Oh
can't
no, she's
stop,
been
but
waiting.
the one thing we know,
I guarantee every cruiser had a bow and arrow in it.
Oh yes,
And
After that first attack, 100%.
and when she gets a picture of someone dressed up in the tunnels, he was like, she confronts him about it, and he says, "Hey, would you like to be director of Homeland Security when I'm in the White House?"
Yeah,
and I was like, "Oh, that's a dirty move." And surely she's not so power hungry that she can't see through that. But it does soften her up.
But
and
it
then
was
he
also,
circles back to like, yeah, we'll get that person. And
it was also
sneaky.
like it was like, we're in Washington, it's far away, but aren't you like maybe seeing a guy who works in Washington?
Yeah.
Like isn't isn't that too? Wouldn't be so bad. You might be pretty good about that. Which is that's a
that's dirty pool, but
it is it's underhanded. Done. It is. It de-escalates. But again, I think that's the political side of him. That isn't. That's the politician in him, not coming out, not in the public sense, but how he can use and manipulate and get people on his side. Using that kind of tactic, appealing to both a professional and a personal side of her, and to the point where she leaves her stunned and he basically walks away. As she's like mulling this over, this potential offer, he just walks away and he's good to go. But you do see how quickly she turns on him on that, because I guess maybe showing that while they did seem to work very well together, it really was just kind of on a knife's edge. That was the one line he could never cross again, and yet he did it, got away with it, and managed to flip it on its head and turn it back onto her, to where now she potentially could be in some way a little indebted to him,
Right.
Yeah. That was very clever. Right. It's low, but it's clever.
Yes, absolutely. So anyway, so you've got that one, and then, I thought that was a good story arc. It was, him suiting up again, him announcing his like grand ending.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a little strange that, given how weird issue 40 was, it never came up again.
Yeah,
like I kind
total
of like,
one shot.
Why not drop an Easter egg in of like him walking past a newsstand and the Great Machine comic is sitting on the newsstand or something?
Yeah, or him picking it up, or him signing it. Yeah, there could have been, that really would have been fun if we had seen that come out at some point, or if it was just in the background, like issue 1 framed on a wall or something like that. Like especially maybe at the very, very end when he gets the call from McCain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
in the background there, maybe there's just a framed issue of a Vertigo #1, the Great Machine, written by Garth Ennis, drawn by Jim Lee, something like that. That would have been fun. But it does get to show that that issue was such a one-off, which I think bolsters the idea that we talked about, that probably should have been one of the specials and not in the main run. And then an issue like, I think both Halloween and the special 3 and special 4, the tune drawn by Jean-Paul Leon, those had more impact and effect, I think, on the overall story in terms of giving more history to Mitchell and informing the character we see, in the kind of the current timeline. I think those stories, whether or not you want to use the guest artists or not, those stories could have easily fit into the main run of storytelling. And then something like issue 40 would have been perfect for a special. Now that you've set up the idea that you have specials with guest artists and things like that, I think that would have been from a narrative standpoint, probably a better swap.
Yeah, it just a strange choice. Still, I stand by what I said last week, which is, if I ever see both of them at a show, that's the issue I'm having them sign.
Yeah.
Just because they're both, their images, like
on the cover,
them writing and drawing them themselves.
Yeah,
their own words in their mouths, and it's a cool meta piece.
Also, it would prevent what happened with you right now, which is, if you don't have them collected, of potentially reading them out of order.
Right.
Quote unquote out of order. Because if you could read 40 at any time. You could read at the end after that Mitchell has left New York, ran for president, didn't win, but became vice president. All that stuff. You could read a special at the end just from a time when he was mayor and he met with a couple of comic book creators, versus you get to the end and you have special 4 to read, which actually fits somewhere in the middle of this run. Like I said, in between like 44 and 45. If that had just been the issue in the middle there, even with the guest artist, then narratively you would have no issues in terms of the information that the creators want the readers to have as they finish the story. So it would eliminate some of that confusion there, that I don't think exists with the first 2 specials, because that was specifically about his time with McPherson. So as long as you read that early on, you're good to go. But I think specials 3 and 4, the ones that Jean-Paul Leon drew, I think those would have fit better in the regular series continuity, just from a story standpoint, story delivery standpoint, because those felt a little more essential, I think, to me, in terms of filling out the story of Mitchell and not only where his powers come from, but how it affects and kind of
I was
has a longer tail for him in the current timeline of the story.
Yeah, I was wondering in the creators' minds what constitutes the special issue, and I was thinking,
exactly, yes,
it's somewhere, it's not progressing the timeline. It's kind of dropped in at a single time, and it's not doing the time jump, because every other issue is managing 2 timelines.
Yeah, those last 2 specials were well, I guess all 4 specials were set in one time and telling one story. I guess the first 2 specials were a 2-parter there, and 3 and 4 were individuals, but you're right, they were telling one specific moment, one specific time.
Yeah. That said, I think issue 40 meets the criteria of special issue.
Yes.
In every possible way, even the fact that it's following a different character other than 100. Like 100's in it, but it's following Brian K. Vaughan.
Yeah, it's him and Tony. Yeah, it's them. They're the main characters there. Absolutely.
So just extremely strange choices.
I will say though, my favorite moment maybe of the entire series is in special 4, when Mitchell's in front of the windmill and he says, "Even old New York was once New Amsterdam."
Yeah.
Which is, for anyone who doesn't know, that's a line from They Might Be Giants song from Istanbul, not Constantinople. Which I read that and always get a kick out of it. I'm thus going to assume that Brian K. Vaughan is They Might Be Giants fan, because you don't put that line in there without,
or at least the one song. Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, if you know They Might Be Giants,
I always wished I was a bigger fan, because I always thought the greatest cover band name in the world would be They Might Be Giants. Or They Might Be Giants. Like, just putting that on, I'm like,
I only know the second one's better. Yeah.
Right. I was like, I think I know like 5 songs of theirs. And I'm like, I could do like a coffee shop hour-long gig called He Could Be They Might Be Giants.
And here's the thing. If you're someone who's not a fan of They Might Be Giants, but you've heard of them, you've probably heard of a handful of songs like Particle Man, Birdhouse on Your Soul, Istanbul, not Constantinople. They're all from the same album. The album's Flood. So if you're not a fan of They Might Be Giants, but you're maybe aware of them, you're probably only aware of one album, and the songs are all from that one album. So it's possible maybe he's not the biggest fan, but it is still, I mean, that's so obviously a specific callback. And of course, it's because he's standing in front of a windmill and the whole thing's about wind turbines and whatnot. But it's a funny moment that, again, I think if you know, it jumps out at you. If you don't, it's just a line, and maybe you wonder why it gets its own like panel by itself. So, but I thought that's funny. I enjoy it. But yeah, that's the final special there.
That was not lost on me.
Yeah.
But I also thought no one will care.
It is one of those things. It's like some of the meta
it's
jokes.
A literal Easter egg. It's
Well, it's like the meta jokes in 40. There are a ton of meta jokes about comics and comic creators, and there are even some in that last special when they're talking about why. What the one newspaper guy was like, you're pushing all the newspapers to print on recycled paper to help save and to be more green, but yet you read comic books and all that stuff's printed on new pen, blah blah blah.
Right.
So the idea of print as a medium and all that, there are meta jokes there that, and I said the specific comic book ones, comic creator stuff that are in issue 40, you don't have to know. Nothing takes away from if you don't know them, but they're not going to explain the jokes to you. They're just going to put them in there, and if you get them, you get them, and if you don't, you haven't lost anything. It's only additive. There's nothing essential to know where these Easter eggs come from or why they're in there or anything like that. And that's just another example of it.
Yeah. But there's like, you get a very clear picture of Brian K. Vaughan here. That said, I don't think you could probably suss it out, but I don't think you get Brian K. Vaughan's political views, which is interesting from a political book. But I'm not reading 100 as a stand-in for BKV's personal. Like, I don't think there's anything about the book that would suggest that.
No. I think you can get if you're someone who subscribes to his newsletter or a Substack or whatnot, I think you can get where he comes from. Like, he's on the left. Which maybe
there's no
surprise
there. Yeah.
Yeah. But I would wager that he has written Mitchell in some cases. I'm going to guess he probably picked and chose which ones, which issues Mitchell would be on a similar side and which maybe he would specifically be on the opposite side of. I'm sure he had to figure that out in order to make Mitchell a believable independent centrist, right? You can't decide on a whim when and where it is. I have to imagine there was some thought put in of if I'm going to say this guy is an independent, I have to define what his stances are on some of these larger hot button issues, regardless of if they agree with the writer's personal views. So yeah, I have to imagine he has what Mitchell's platform is somewhere or had it.
Yeah. Well, I also think there's probably something really liberating about the creative act of writing a fictional character who's not towing a party line, because I do think
there's a fantasy there, definitely.
Well, but it's like I have my like political affiliations. I am registered with a party mostly because I want to vote in primaries, but it does like give you this groupthink where it's like every once in a while the party that I subscribe to will take an issue on take a stance on something, and I'm like, I either don't care about that or I'm not sure I align with them on this. But then you see the other side rally immediately around the opposite, and you're like, well, I disagree with them on everything, so I guess I'll just kind of fall in line on this one issue. And I think there's something so freeing about writing an independent character who can break rank at any time on any issue.
Because they have no rank.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, and I think ideally they would have like a consistent internal philosophy that kind of like helps them with their, these are their values, and this is how every possible issue bumps up against their values.
And I think we see that mostly with Mitchell, with 100 here, when he's talking about, again, the idea of like, in this last story arc, when him and Wiley are talking about that Plan B pill, the RU-47, and he's saying how Mitchell makes something of like he claims some sort of moral abstinence, like I can't make a judgment on this here, and Wiley comes back is like you basically authorized gay marriage, and Mitchell's response was like, no, that's a civil rights
issue, right? Yeah, there's a clear distinction.
So he does. I'm sure if you went through, you could parse through the entire 50 issues and the specials and figure out exactly what his platform is and kind of what his guiding principle is. And I think, and there's even a sense of when he's talking to Candy, I think, when Candy basically comes to him and is like, she calls him out, like, you're going to run for president someday. You're going to do this, and you should do this, and you're going to want me as chief of staff. I'm going to run it for you. And he at one point basically calls her back on it, saying like, you want me to run as a libertarian? Because it seems like that's where his views align to. I'm trying to dig where that came up. But that idea of kind of what his views are. is it personal freedom? Is it civil liberties and civil rights? How much intrusion, quote unquote, of government should be. I think he he has a consistent, I want to say, morals, not a
philosophy. It's
yeah,
a consistent
thank you. Yeah,
philosophy.
yeah, it's because
It
of
does not,
philosophy.
and
Yes,
I would say it's like, I think this comes up all the time in like political discourse of like, oh, it's like all the, Republicans are the party of, freedom and liberty, unless it's about this or this or this
yeah,
or this.
yeah,
And it's like, and the liberals are all about government control, unless it's about this or this or this or that.
yeah,
And it's like,
yeah,
yeah, they're hodgepodges. And if people who live in that can make it make sense, they can make their views fit together. But I don't think, just the messy, convoluted, accumulating over 50, 60 years of issues. I don't think anyone has like the pure philosophy that strictly determines everything.
no,
And I think
no.
that's what Mitchell's shooting for. And I think that's what a lot of like college freshmen want from
Well,
like, I'm going to pick a philosophy and I'm going to let that
yes,
dictate every single issue. And then you realize you can't actually vote that way because no
yeah.
one runs that way.
Yeah, so no, which comes back to the idea of Mitchell being this fantasy political figure. But you talked about it. It must be freeing. I'm sure it's freeing for the character to have that sort of political ideology. I think there's probably something freeing also for the creators here, in that you can have your character align with your personal beliefs when needed, when necessary for the story, but
But you
then
just make the character unlikable
well,
enough
yeah, but no,
that
but
no
you
one
can,
buys it. Yeah.
but you can also have that character take the opposite side of maybe something you may or may not agree on, or something that you disagree with from your own party. Like you said, every side, every political party, defined political party, at some point is probably going to take a stance on an issue that you don't agree with. But maybe because the majority of the party line is what you agree with, you you then have to make a choice, right? We letting this one or two issues define everything, or do you look at the larger platform? And so by having an independent, I think you could have Mitchell call out the parts of your political ideology that maybe you don't like, that the other side, quote unquote, takes shots at, and you could give that person the voice to say, hey, maybe everyone on this side of the aisle isn't always right, because if you are, this is the way that it's seen. So it's like he can both kind of self-aggrandize the parts that he believes in, and then also like kind of self-deprecate and take shots at the parts of the sides he doesn't, by allowing his character to be on the other side, to be that voice of dissent.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also good character beats too. It's like whenever I need to knock him down a peg, I'm going to put him on the opposite side of me and I'll just rip him a new one.
Yes,
That being
yeah, yeah,
said,
yeah. And then have one of his advisors
I
maybe
don't think
come
he
in.
ever gets like shunned or shamed or shut down on a political issue.
He doesn't. He doesn't. He doesn't.
Just
And
on every time he puts on the costume, he gets his
yes,
butt
yeah.
kicked. One
Well,
way, he like gets enough of the job done that he's a hero, but he's not actually that good at it.
he doesn't get shot down in public. I think what you talk about is if you want to, whenever they want to kind of ground, no pun intended there, ground Mitchell, they put him on the quote unquote wrong side of something, and then have one of his advisors coming from the other side and tell him why he's wrong. Whether it's Wiley, whether it's Angotti, whether
Right.
it's Candy, his chief, so they put Mitchell in the unfavorable position, and they have someone else come in on the inside, in private, I guess, take him down a peg. But in public, we don't see him take hits for this. All of his moves from a political standpoint generally seem to work out. Even at the end here, the gambit of the whole back and forth of saying that this plan for the planet, the morning after pill, that was your deputy's idea and you were going to shoot it down. The idea of leaking that to show that the person you said should be the next mayor, that he's just not like your puppet, and
Right.
and that specifically reminded me of the final days of the West Wing. And even not the final days too, but like when spoiler alert, when Rob Lowe's Sam Seaborn leaves the White House to run for Congress, and President Bartlett specifically tells him, like, listen, like there were times when you didn't agree with the things that we ended up doing. So when you're running on that and it comes up, you don't have to defend me or the administration. Like you need to stand on your own.
Right.
There's a differentiation there of you working for the White House versus you running as your own candidacy. And so the idea of trying to separate, showing that he's not just a lapdog. And I think this same kind of gambit here to show that.
I mean, it's the same as when President Bartlett calls Josh in season 7 and says, write these numbers down. And they were like numbers on childhood education. Yeah. And he's like, go after me.
Yeah,
rip me a new one, because President Bartlett cares about the issue being advanced. Yeah. And he's like, if there's a candidate who can make hay off of saying, hey, we all like President Bartlett, but he did not do enough on this, and I'm going to create room to the left of him on education or wherever, then President Bartlett cares more about the issue than he does about his own personal reputation. Yeah.
Well, because at this point, he's not running again. He can't run again. President Bartlett can't. And so you have Mitchell in the same spot who says, I'm not running again. So from a political standpoint, at least in the city of New York, it's not going to hurt him, he thinks, because you hit me with this, like, I'm already not running. I told you I'm not coming back. And it's only the idea of the seed of, well, you should run for president, that maybe he holds back or does, or has second thoughts on it. But yeah, that idea of, again, there's a idealistic fantasy of this is how politicians should work, that someone would care more about the issues, that there's a way to play the political game that's also a way to advance like society and make it better, right. That by President Bartlett doing that for Josh and playing the political game of, you can score points this way, but by scoring points, you could also maybe do something about it in the future. There's two levels that are happening here. And I think the idea that they're floating here is the same kind of idea of, we could get what we want on both ends. We could get, we could have someone in there, the person that we would want to have, who could someone we know can do the job and is qualified for it. And also we can get this whole deal with the morning after pill through. We can get that approved as well. It's win-win. You're still playing the game, but it's beneficial for everybody because someone's willing to take the hit. And Mitchell is that person here who was willing to take the hit. Even if that leak did come out of nowhere because it came from Wiley himself and not through the way that Mitchell and Candy talked about it. The end there gets to them. So the means got them to the same end, but it kind of just reinforces, there's a feedback loop here of the ideal politician, the person that's a young person in the early aughts would have wanted to see, the kind of candidate that, frankly, our generation and the generation maybe slightly older than us, because that's where BKV is, that kind of person we would want to see in office.
Yeah. And BKV is probably, he's about the same distance from you that you are from me, right? Like, it's not crazy. I think he's only like 10 years older than me.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. He's probably near my brother's age. So he's probably 4 or 5 years older than me. My brother's 3 years older than me. I don't think BKV is much older than that. So yeah, it's that's what I'm saying. So it's our generation. You're on the younger end, and someone like BKV is just on the older end of especially in the early aughts, especially post 9/11, the kind of leader politician that group of the end of Gen X, the early millennials kind of thing, wanted to see. And I think he's writing that in Mitchell 100. And of course, that's a politician we never get and will never get. And now we're further from that now than we ever have been. But,
right.
All these books, I mean, even someone like Jed Bartlett in The West Wing, someone who is staunchly on the left, is still, they're still in idolizing of that kind of person, because even that character doesn't exist. Even someone who is specifically on one side of the aisle or another, those people don't exist. even there are people on the right on the West Wing, not all of them, but there's some on the right who are also just given this perfect a version of themselves, you know? So it
I
wasn't
mean,
like it
Arnie
was,
Vinnick was
yes,
the perfect.
exactly.
It's
Arnie
like
Vinnick,
if
Ainsley
there were
Hayes.
an
Yeah,
AI designed to make the perfect presidential candidate,
yeah,
Arnie Vinnick is what it would
yeah.
spit out.
Which I think they were trying to make Vinnick something of a John McCain. Like
Yes,
yeah,
I think yes.
There are influences of Arnold Vinnick, which is the Alan Alda character, influence of John McCain in him, and there were obvious influences of Barack Obama in Matt Santos, the Jimmy Smits character. That these are the two characters that run for office at the end of The West Wing, season 6 and 7. So yeah, so that's art imitating life. So that there was a sense that I think there was a sense that McCain could have been that guy, maybe up
I
until
think
the
yeah. Well, and
up
I
until
think the famous narrative around that election, I think, is that he was like he would have been the runaway candidate under any other circumstance, but Barack Obama was just the perfect candidate at the perfect time.
yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
there was just no overcoming it.
and I remember too, and this is where I remember some of the parallels. Um, on the West Wing with the Arnie Vinnick character, at one point, one of his top advisors, who was the mom on Home Improvement.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah. Patricia.
Richardson. Yeah, Richardson.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. At one point she says she kind of implores him like you have to turn back to the base because Vinnick, while Republican, wasn't the most conservative. And you think about someone like McCain, probably got that same note and then chose Sarah Palin as his running mate, you know? So
I
the
do
idea,
remember that being like when I read this book and saw that thing that he was like McCain's running man, I was like, yeah, that is how I think a lot of people wish it would have gone. Just like the
yes,
sense I got
exactly.
from my conservative friends was like anyone other than Sarah Palin, and you still would have been able to squeak it out against a very populist wave for Obama.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And it may not have made a difference. It may or may not have,
it may not have, but I
but
don't know.
choosing Sarah Palin at that moment was a clear hard turn to the right, saying we need to get the hardcore base because that's the only way we think we have a shot versus maybe trying to get people from the left, that was a clear choice, I think, from a political strategy standpoint. Instead of siphoning votes from the left, we need to make sure we have everybody from the right, at the expense of anybody from the left at that point. So yeah, when you get to the end and you see that it's McCain 100 on the ticket and that they've won the White House, I do think there are people closer in the middle, more centrists who were on kind of the McCain train there for a while, that if a person like Mitchell Hundred existed,
You pull a
and had
true
picked him,
independent and put him
yes,
with a
with
rogue
McCain,
Republican.
yeah, yeah, with John McCain, then that definitely could have challenged. Now, again,
And maybe that's secretly what BKV was hoping for, was like, you know,
well, and I think so.
if
This
nothing else, like both candidates get, when there are two good candidates, everyone is better off, right? Because they challenge each other, they push each other, they clarify each other. Whereas, like, when you just get errant nonsense like we get
yeah,
now
yeah,
in the darkest timeline, but which is like Ex Machina, actually not the darkest timeline. What we got instead, is the darkest timeline.
yeah, 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 yeah. The timeline of potential multiverse collapse and war, somehow rosier than what we actually lived.
Yes.
So I do wonder about this though. At the end, the choice to make it McCain and 100, because obviously this book is being written in 09, 2010. Because this is when these finalists
Right. He
are coming
already
out.
knew who won.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they even make the joke about, hey, did you see they put us on the cover with that spider guy?
Right.
Which again, no shot to John McCain, but that seems like a very John McCain thing to recognize that it's a spider character, but not be able to put that it's Spider-Man.
Right.
Like that seems like a very old person thing. because obviously there's very famous cover of Spider-Man and President Obama. That went to like a gazillion printings or whatnot, and thus is not worth anything because there are 5 billion of those copies out there. But they even make that same illusion there. And of course, as I'm speaking this out loud, I understand they can't actually call him Spider-Man because this is a DC book. So that joke actually works in two directions. So apologies to John McCain on that one. But so we're in a timeline where that same sort of thing happens. But would it have been different, functionally different at the end if that poster was Obama 100?
Right.
Like, what would the ending have hit or been any different if that had been the case versus McCain 100?
I think it was just to say this is the type of character that would have altered history. Whereas you put him in there with the guy who actually won, and it's like, okay, you swap out Biden for 100, big deal.
Yeah.
Whereas oh, we've really branched off into an alternate timeline now.
Okay, that's fair. Okay.
That's how I took it. It's not necessarily correct.
Okay. Well, no, I like that. I buy that to make it, that it's not just that we lost only one tower in New York and they rebuilt it, and now everything is effectively back to the same. That it's still diverging, it's still going, and it's still different from our world, and that's a surefire sign of that. I like that.
Right.
Like that.
You kind of see it branching off in a different direction. I mean, the real thing would have been like, I mean, like
if
the real
actually
fantasy,
won,
if the West Wing, so clearly he entered
the race,
the race,
did
not align with a major party, and when he hit the point, which was clearly before November, where he would have to choose to bow out, or perhaps he didn't get enough support to make it on the to be the third candidate in the debate, which I think is like 11 or 12%.
Probably didn't
vote. Probably didn't quite.
Or maybe he did one. Maybe he got to one and then wasn't there.
And then McCain said, I think you have a different 10% of the vote than my 42% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And if we add those together, in theory, that's 52%. Assuming there's maybe 1% of overlap that can't stomach one or the other of us and they fall off, but we still have 50%.
Yeah, but you don't think because he's an independent, he drops out, he doesn't endorse anybody. So you think the McCain camp calls him when it's probably leaked, right? That he's going to drop out, because
or it's
when
a
this
quid pro
happens,
quo. It's, hey, why don't you drop out now so that you're not being forced out? This is your decision, rather than you dropped out and you grabbed whatever thing was available. Yeah, no,
looking
I think
for position. You think they made the call first? Yeah,
right. I would have appreciated the West Wing nod if it was somehow alluded to the fact that Obama won but made McCain Secretary of State. Like Vinnick,
that's what
Vinnick got in
West Wing. Again, the highest of fantasy possibilities. Just like,
but it
just
made
like,
so much sense in the show.
Oh no, it
was
did.
just like,
but it also made sense.
Beat. It's like, gosh, that was brilliant.
It also made sense that President Bartlett, when trying to put through a new Chief Justice who's a woman, Glenn Close, that they would also nominate a Republican, a conservative judge in William Fichtner. Like, we'll get this through because we're going to give you another someone who came off like a hardline conservative, but yet he was written very reasonable. And again, the idea that all of these vast majority of these characters are political fantasies. So the idea of a very liberal president is going to put a very liberal woman on as Chief Justice on the bench, but it's okay because we're going to counterbalance that by the person who writes the quote unquote great dissent. Someone on the right, a conservative judge, will nominate at the same time, get them two together. It's the highest of fantasy in terms of political theater. But I do wonder about the end, and maybe I think you've turned me around on that in terms of wanting to make certain that this is a even more distinct timeline, And I will say though, at the end, we do get a picture of a living person. He does draw John McCain, in the poster.
Well, yeah. Yes. I was going to say living. I was like, At the time, yes, he was.
Yeah,
Living.
that's yeah,
Yeah.
Because we talked about last week with, John Paul II. He had recently passed by the time the book had come out, but not when the story took place in '03
Right.
when Mitchell would have visited. And they go through great lengths to not show his face, and only at one point do you see him kind of laying down prone in bed. So their reluctance to show real life people, they have no problems referencing them, as we talk about, especially last week when the Republican National Convention in '04 came to New York. They mentioned Rudy Giuliani. They mentioned President Bush. None of those people are shown. And it's only here at the very, very end do we actually get, and even then it's just a campaign picture of John McCain and Mitchell Hundred. And I do love too that the pose of Mitchell Hundred is basically the pose they use for like the first issue, like the beginning of the series, him kind of his arms crossed, looking to the side a little bit. Which I think that's just kind of a funny nod there.
Yeah. So let me go back to what was like I think in the Zero episode when I was saying, what would it be like if he had this power set and they were like revisited the story, but like 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I think the cool way to do it now is to say, okay, he did 8 years in the White House as vice president.
And he's young. He's young.
And he's
right?
young. But then he ran as, the Republican candidate in 2016 and lost. Let's say that all happened. So now in 2020 or 2024.
God, if he only was a Republican candidate in 2016.
Oh my gosh.
Boy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But this time we're doing, he's given up on politics by 2024 because, all this crazy stuff has happened. And in 2024, he's decided to go back to being the Great Machine. Doesn't have any of his original supporting cast. The flashbacks are all to his 8 years in office. And the real time is him. Yeah, you flip it and say, how does the Great Machine function 2024 to 2032 while reflecting on the issues of our day that he encountered in office? And when he got to the highest level, technically like second highest level or a heartbeat away from the highest level, he realized, okay, this is the ceiling of what can be accomplished here. Now he knows what he can accomplish over in the superhero level. Because the whole time he was a superhero, he's like, I think I could actually do more on the other side of this, on the legal side. Now that he's been to the White House, he's saying,
seeing
like,
what the highest is.
He's like, but I think he would be more of like, if you think of how Tony Stark was in Iron Man 1, where it was like, here's a hotbed situation with a terrorist cell across the world. If the U.S. government intervenes, they'll just kill the hostages, they'll do whatever. And Iron Man's like, cool, I'll just zoom in there and do what I do.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Hunter would become that. He wouldn't be the domestic, friendly neighborhood Great Machine. I think he would be like, I saw what the U.S. military cannot accomplish for world peace, and now the Great Machine will go do that internationally, global. I'm like, I think that's a really great pitch.
That would be, and then your thought is like, oh, so the Great Machine is going to go to Gaza. We're going to step on that gigantic third rail right now.
No. It would be what were the issues in when he was in office that were were stalemates for him. That now that he's not in office,
let's run this out here. So I think at the end of the book here, he mentions he's just turning 40. I believe, is that about right? Because he's born in 50.
Right.
Well, no. He
born
was
in the 70s, right?
No. He was born in. He was a kid. He was born in the 60s. He was a kid in the 70s. He's born in the mid 60s, early 60s, I think, right? Yeah, because he's like a teenager in the mid 80s when they're talking about Christ on Infinite Earth. So yes. I think in '04 he's about 40-ish. So he'd be like in his 60s now, be in his 60s suiting back up.
Okay. I mean, it's basically Dark Knight Returns, right?
It could be, but could be.
But I think he's smarter. He's definitely more ruthless this time around.
And they could do a thing where like, well, listen, the stuff in his body, he ages slower, or he's 60. Yes.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. They could, because people talk about like, well, there's even that little joke there, right? When Bradbury has his last scene, and he's all like ragged and bearded and and
Right.
and Mitchell looks basically the same. So they even kind of joked about that. So they could totally take that throwaway line and be like, yeah, he's in his 60s now.
Well,
But
and if you're 100, why build like the Rocketeer suit? Why not build like an actual Iron Man suit that you can operate with your power?
well, that's actually a fabulous question, because obviously, even though this is a DC book in a DC world, like Iron Man
Right.
exists.
But he's making fun of the jetpack at the end of the series. But he's like, he goes down in the tunnel. He's like, I don't know if this is going to work that well in the tunnel. And he's like, I'm not sure it really ever worked well anyway.
No. Yes.
Like, that's a really great point.
That actually, that part what you just said is fascinating. The idea of, make the whole suit like that now. And maybe they couldn't have done that back then. And obviously, from a creator standpoint, you're not going to create Iron Man at a DC book now, but it would make total sense for him to make a suit like that, where he can control every aspect of it. Instead of
if he makes it different enough, people may not think of it as
the Great Machine.
The Great Machine, right? He might be able to.
And at that point,
and they might be like, Mitchell Hunter's too old to be doing that. And he could even, oh gosh, this is getting better and better as I go. He could even do the classic thing of like, he could do a press conference while controlling that suit,
have the suit
and
come
have
in,
it fly by, or like wave high or something like that.
That's my bodyguard, and then and now we're in full
Iron Man. Oh my
territory.
Gosh. Yeah, and I think Brian K. Vaughan would ham it up big time with that.
No, I like this idea, especially with where our world is now with technology and also politically. Although it's almost like it's thornier to try to do a political show now. Like you have to do Veep in order to do a political show, because like the West Wing now, the idea of political earnesty just doesn't fly now. Like you couldn't air the West Wing now, because it just, it wouldn't, that the climate that we're in just doesn't allow for that type of fantasy anymore. So it'd be way thornier. But I'm with you. I would love to read it. I'd read it in a heartbeat, because I think it'd be fascinating to think what in real time a character like this, having gone through the next 20 years from when the book was set to now, knowing what has happened in society on all those levels, societal, technological, political, all of that, to extrapolate out where a person like Mitchell and his abilities, what he would have experienced, what it would have been like, what those years in the White House would have been like. Again, you gave him 2 terms, right? You gave him 2 terms. So he's there from,
so you have enough runway to tell story.
Yeah. So he's in office during that time. I mean, that was so much is going on. So much is happening then. I'd be fascinating. I really do want that. That'd be a lot of fun. That'd be a lot of fun.
Brian K. Vaughan, if you listen to our little podcast, please do that. I mean, now I'm tempted to like actually write up a full-fledged pitch. And if I ever see him at a show, just say like, here's my 1-page pitch for like how to bring and not even like back. Like it could be a standalone story on its own. Like you would not have had to have read Ex Machina in order to read, The Great Machine, which could be a follow-up series.
Actually called The Great Machine. Yeah.
And have it illustrated by, Jim Lee and
Garth Ennis. Yeah. I mean, you might have, you'll have a better chance of seeing Tony Harris at a show again. Maybe give it to him, be like, hey, if you speak to,
you still talk to Brian K. Vaughan,
the BKV anytime, pass it along. It does, though. It takes you back to another thing that we talked about in the Zero, this idea that there is a long gestating adaptation of this story in the works. Oscar Isaac slated to produce and star. It's called The Great Machine. But the further we get from it, the longer that it sits in whatever development limbo it's at, whatever state it's at, the more I wonder, can you do it as the setting that it's in? Like it becomes a period piece at that point, and now we're 20 years on.
I think that's probably part of the appeal But to me, so I just
But
finished.
but the appeal could be, let's take the idea and drop this guy into modern day, and then
Right.
that's your update. So it's no longer a continuation of the comic. It's just an updated revamp, soft reboot of the idea dropped in modern day. And how does he experience that? In which case, that would on one hand be great because that frees them from the bounds of the comic,
Right.
just here, take the idea, and in which case I'd be okay with that, because then that thing, whatever that end product is, would solely be judged on its own merit, knowing from the jump that, hey, we're not adapting the comic, we're adapting the idea of the comic. Yes, he's still called Mitchell 100. Yes, he still has the same power set. Yes, there'll still be a political aspect to it, that sort of thing. But it wouldn't be comparing it constantly to the comic. But you could port over anything that isn't time restricted. I would love if that were the case, and then we get to explore these same ideas that you and I are talking about. Because if it ends up being a period piece, I don't know, then it's just weird, right?
I think that, I mean, yeah, it's weird because you can't put the language that people used back in that day that is in the book in a modern show, because it would just be flayed for it. And it's just no point. But did you watch the TV show Fallout?
Yeah.
I know you're not a video gamer.
No, I'm not, but I enjoy Fallout, the show.
Fallout was incredible. And what I loved most about it is that I love Fallout. I played Fallout 3. I played Fallout New Vegas. I played Fallout 4. I played some Fallout 76. I am steeped in the lore, hundreds and hundreds of hours. And it was extremely faithful to the idea of Fallout while telling an original story, switching up some factions. Like, no one had to worry about, like, oh, they didn't do that like they did it in the game. It's like, it wasn't trying to. It was like, this is set in the same world with basically the same setup, but it's just like, this is how one person played the game. Because in those games, the choices you make as a character determines who you can be in an alliance with, who you can have as a partner. Like, if you have like good karma, like, there's a ghoul character that will not be your sidekick. Like, as soon as you start making too many good choices, he's like, I think you and I are going different ways. Sorry, man. And like, there's a super mutant character who will follow you around as long as you're being good. And if you start like just offing civilians in the head, he's like, seems like you kind of lost your way. If you find your way again, I'll be here. Like, come find me again. And it's like, all of these things, they took all of that, put it in a blender, and said, like, we're not going to try to tell a specific version of the story. We're telling an original story from within this world. And I think that should be the norm for adaptations.
And as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I talked to my brother about this. My brother is also a big gamer, loves Fallout. While they pulled story and plot elements from the games of Fallout, the TV show was actually set at a date beyond any of the games.
I believe that's true.
So theoretically,
timeline.
Yeah, I this is my understanding, that it's set beyond the timeline in any of the games, and I guess it may affect the Vegas game, I think, or some of that nature. Right. But the idea that even though the idea of a character leaving to find their father, or the water,
always that's the staple. Yeah.
But
like,
there's
those some family tie that pulls you out of your
aspects. Those aspects they've pulled, but the actual timeline is set beyond any of the games, so you could look at it as just another chapter of the world, but it's a game that no one's played yet because the games aren't set in this time frame. And that sort of adaptation, I agree, is perfect. I love the idea of finding a way to take the core of a story and port it over to an original story, because it shows a deeper level of understanding, that you're not just trying to replicate story beats A, B, C, and D. Anything that does that, or any creator that does that, Zack Snyder, shows that they don't understand what they're actually doing. Right. If it's just, oh, I need to go from A to B to C to D to E, and then put that on the screen, link, ta-da, look, I did it. No, to me, that shows that you've only read the thing, you don't understand the thing, and you don't understand what the story is actually about. And I if they were to do something like that for this at this point, I'm going to still call it theoretical ex machina adaptation because it's been so long and I don't know where
there's
it even
no
existed.
actual
Yeah,
adaptation coming.
Yeah, it's just it's been optioned, so people have thought about adapting it. That's about, I think, as far as they've got.
Yeah, it'll arrive right after Paper Girls season 2.
Yeah,
Firefly season 2. Yeah,
on the MIA network. But that would be, I think that would work perfect for a story like this because our world is so different than it was 20 years ago when the book was set and being written. But just take that idea, take the character, and you can even make him a still kind of political idealist in our current world of political extremism, and you give him the same power. There's something cool about that. And you can stay true to the heart of the story, the core of the story, without being like, well, now we got to do this issue, this issue, this issue. But you can still approach it the same kinds of ways because, hey, guess what? Abortion is still an issue. Racism still an issue.
Right.
Marriage equality, even though thought we had that one solved a little bit, still kind of an issue for some people, school vouchers, public and private schools. These things are still problems. Weirdly, one of the things that wasn't discussed here, specifically, I think was gun violence. I think we talked about the one kid that was shot by the police officer, which they touched on, and the idea of, because we talked about, hey, you send the black guy in the office, the deputy, to talk to the family because you can't send a white guy to do that. We talked a little bit about that, but that's obviously always been an issue, but it's a much larger and much forefronted issue now. The idea of gun violence and mass shootings, and what could Mitchell do about that? If we're talking about AR-15s, assault rifles that the public can buy, how would he feel about that if he's thinking like, well, can I stop something like that? Could I stop a mass shooter? He's maybe now no longer worried about stopping airplanes crashing into buildings. He's thinking about, can I stop the one guy who walks into a school or a church or a club or a concert or a movie theater or something like that? That's an issue that is much more forefronted now than I think it was 20 years ago. So there are still some of these issues that are applicable to Mitchell's power set,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's fertile ground there. So yeah, I would love to see it if it's comic book form and it actually is Mitchell doing it. Because yeah, you're right. As I'm talking through, I could totally see him think about everything we've gone through in the past 20 years. Someone like him maybe being in the White House and being completely disgusted with politics because he sees what they can't do.
Right. He still is exploring. By the end of this book, he's still exploring how much more can I accomplish in politics? And like really by the way, I forgot this comp because it was the second to last story arc, and being the penultimate, the final one pushed it out of my head. But the comp I thought of, I was like, this is a little similar to like Bulworth, where like, you have the politician who's like, nothing left to lose. I've got a hard out, just going to do everything exactly the way I think it should be done. Regardless,
and lo and behold, people like it. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Which is like completely different setup to get there, but the comp is there, right?
Yeah. The politician who's unencumbered, who then quote unquote speaks the truth, and then turns out people like that. The politician who's not playing the game. Definitely.
Yeah. So anyway, but all of this to say, the fact that our minds can run off in all these directions is just in praise of a very good book. Like a story well told makes you want to live in that world longer, makes you just dream of the possibilities. And there's even a sense in which, even if he were to return to this and tell the story that I just described, you're actually taking something away from me by putting it down on paper. Right?
Yeah. Well, because like, now there's definitive story.
Right. Now it's definitive and you don't get the headcanon. So,
but there's always a risk of that. There's always a risk of something like that. But
always a risk of the cursed child.
I would welcome it because
most aptly named follow-up ever.
Good Lord. I said, I would welcome it because any book written by Brian K. Vaughan, if he's returning to one of his stories, which is not something that he does, but if he were to return to it, and him and Tony Harris were like, we got another story to tell, it's because they really have a story to tell, because at this point, Brian K. Vaughan is an author. He's a writer who, any book he puts out with any collaborator, it's going to sell. It's going to do great because it sells on his name. and the quality is always there, but he's not someone who is looking for work. He doesn't have to go back and be like, got to pay some bills here. Let me go write a Batman story or some Avenger story. If he does that, it's because he wants to do it, because he has an idea. And of course, neither one of those companies are going to say no. So if he were to return to this story, I would have confidence that if Tony Harris would return to the story, I would have full confidence in them that they had a banger idea, that they had something specific they would want to say. And that alone, I would find interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Okay, so now that we're at the end, how would you rate this series? I think kind of on your objective, if you have a 4 or if you have a 5 or 10 star scale, and then I'm also curious where you would rank this in BKV's work.
Interesting. I think I would give this on a 5-star, like a 3.5 to 4.
That's exactly where I am. I'm
somewhere in there.
3 is too low.
Yeah.
4 is pushing it, just given like a little bit of filler as we went along, and then kind of the rushed ending.
There are enough things that I bump against, and then if I'm reading through now, there are definitely storylines and parts I would skip, even just like pages within issues, because like I don't care about this, I don't care about this, I don't care about this. It doesn't take away from my overall enjoyment, but like if I'm skipping through large chunks of issues or storylines, it's not an overall great endorsement. So
it's indicative, yeah.
Yeah. So like 3.5, 3.75, something like that. I would slot it in that zone.
Where's it ranked with BKV's work?
So Paper Girls is my favorite Brian K. Vaughan written book.
Now, do you think there's headroom above that based on whenever and however Saga ends?
Yes. If by the time we get to 108 issues of Saga, it's entirely possible that could be my favorite.
But that's almost unfair to compare 108 issues of Saga to 30 issues of Paper Girls.
Yes, right? It is. Yes. So as it stands right now, Paper Girls is my favorite Brian K. Vaughan written comic. I would say if we're just looking at his creator-owned stuff, because I love Runaways, the book he did at Marvel with Adrian Alfona. I absolutely adore that book, and I love those characters. I'm not counting that. I'm not counting the time, when he wrote Batman and all that stuff. For his creator-owned stuff, I think Paper Girl's 1 right now. I think Saga is 2 because I do love Saga, and I don't think Saga has a chance of dropping. I think it only has a chance to jump higher because I don't think Saga is going to fall off a cliff.
Completely agree.
Like yeah. I don't think that. I do not believe that's on the table for that book. Boy, then I think in the mix here would be
Why the Last Man.
Either Y
comparable run length.
It's Y, Ex Machina. I think I believe they're both 50. Y may be 60. Y may have been 60. It's 50 or 60 issues, but they're comparable length. But then you got something like I really like We Stand on Guard, but that's a 6-issue mini. So again, that's just literally one story. That's hard to compare. I guess so the question is, do I put this above Y on my list? And the answer to that might be dependent on what day you ask me.
Okay.
Like in terms of like,
so maybe the better question is like, which one are you more likely to return to for like a cursory reread?
And if that's the question, the answer for me is Ex Machina, because it has a more episodic nature. And on a cursory reread, I could skip through, read the arc that I like, skip through a little more, read the arc that I like. It's more distinct, it's more episodic in that way, especially early on, like we talked about. It feels more like just episode of the week or storyline of the couple months, So I would be more inclined, and I have been more inclined to return to the story in that manner. But in terms of if I'm going to sit down and just reread the whole damn thing all at once, there I would probably end up going to Y, because I don't want to read the whole thing there all at once. Trying to think if I thought it missed. I mean, again, something like Barrier or
Barrier's a very interesting one.
Well, and also and the Private Eye, Barrier, and We Stand on Guard. Those were all short miniseries, 6-10 issues. Same with Pride of Baghdad. That's like a nonfiction. I mean, it's fictionalized, non-fictionalized. That's an OGN. Again, I'm running through here, seeing if I've missed any creator-owned stuff here. Again, skipping past all of his Marvel and DC stuff. I think that's where I stand right now. This would be
That being said, wherever you rank it, Brian K. Vaughan is one of your favorite creators.
Oh, without question. I mean,
so it's like,
yeah, if his name is on a book, I'm gonna as soon as it comes out in the solicitations, I'm ordering that book. I don't care who he's working with, because I know that person's going to be awesome.
Right.
You know,
or even what the subject matter is.
I do not care if his name is on a book, if it's a new series, if it's a mini series, if it's an OGN. He is one of those people that I am completely in on without hesitation at this point. So, but it's hard to crack those top two, because I think Paper Girls, as we talked about way back when in the day, I think that's a near perfect series of a comic book series.
Right.
Like 100% through and through, every issue, start to finish, perfect start, perfect ending. I think that's a near perfect comic book series. And Saga, a lot hard to do that over 108 issues. That's what they plan to do. But again, even though we're just over halfway through, that book's incredible. And I don't see anything jumping up to take it. Like I said, that can only leap over Paper Girls, which would make Saga then, like, it could jump into my top 5 favorite comics of all time. You know, like if it were that good, that's how high it would jump. But yeah, he's someone that I entrust implicitly, that, you know, and he's also then someone that I wish I could get more books from. You know, on some level, I wish he were like Ed Brubaker, who knows he can just pump out books with Sean Phillips, just as many as they want, because those books are always going to come out. He's someone that I wish on some level could be like either Tom King or James Tynion IV. Also guys that pump out books. They work with a bunch of different artists, which maybe helps. You know, you can write a bunch of scripts.
Lemire is like cranking out a crazy quantity.
And Lemire, same way. Lemire will pump out his scripts, give those to his collaborators, and then work on his own stuff that he writes and draws. You know, so it seems like there's always a book out, whether it's a book that he writes and draws or a book that he's written and is being drawn by one of his frequent collaborators. It's like there's always a Lemire book out because he works so far ahead. Same with King, same with Tynion. Even a guy like Scott Snyder, even though I don't read all of his stuff, these guys are just high output guys. And Brian K. Vaughan isn't that. And I wish you were, because I love his stuff and I would buy all of it. And I know I'm not alone on that. He is one of the most popular writers and creators in comics. So yeah, I wish he would write more. I wish there were more books out. But then, like, I just know if he's writing another book, like some other book, it means he's not writing Saga. And then I get sad because he's not writing Saga.
Right.
You know, so if he's got to focus on one thing at a time and keep it that way, that's great. But yeah, this is up there for me. Overall, I do have specific nitpicks throughout the story, but as an overall arc, start to finish, I think this is a great book.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think this does.
Do you have a similar ranking?
Yeah, it doesn't come anywhere close to beating Paper Girls for me.
Yeah.
And Saga still has the tentative first place. Like,
yeah.
He would have to ruin Saga for it to not beat Paper Girls.
And like I said, I don't think that's possible. I think the worst it'll be is the same level it's at, which is higher than 95% of all comic books out there. You know,
I think it's going to go down as one of the greatest feats in the history of the medium.
But I don't think it's going to get any worse. So you said it can only get better, and that's incredibly hard.
The only thing that would ruin Saga for me, frankly, is if he starts doing things that contradict the storytelling from the very early on. You realize who the narrator is, and that there are hinting at ominous things. If that narrator were to die in issue 90 and then someone else carries the torch for 18 issues, that would piss me off to no end.
I agree.
And it wouldn't be unheard of.
That is grounds for
stuff
knocking the book down. Yes. I don't think they would do that, him and Fiona Staples. I don't think they would.
I'm just saying that's that's what I've already thought through what it would take to knock me
I
off
get,
the
okay,
bandwagon.
fine. There's
and
a
there it
non-zero
is.
chance that could happen. I don't think it would though, but I'm with you. If that did happen, I would be, I would be inclined. I wouldn't jump ship because I
No,
can't
I'd
jump
still
ship.
buy the last 18
Yeah.
issue. Are you kidding
Yeah,
me?
yeah,
I'd buy
yeah,
the
yeah,
last
yeah,
18 issue,
yeah,
and then I'd buy them again in trade, and then I'd buy
yeah,
Compendium 2,
yeah,
and I'd be like, I can't believe he did this to the last 18 issues
yeah,
while
yeah.
owning every version of it that comes out.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
then,
yeah, yeah.
clamoring in line to sign it if he comes to a con within 200 miles of me. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm a filthy hypocrite. I'll
yeah,
buy,
yeah.
I'll take whatever he gives me. Yeah, like
But,
I saw some friends like arguing over like Disney Star Wars content on social media. And one of them was like, I wish it was this, and this. And his friend jumps in and says, shut up and take your free Star Wars. And I was like,
yeah,
yeah, that's how I feel about Saga. I'm like, shut up
yeah,
and take your Saga.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Don't try to dictate the terms which your artist gives you the art.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
take it.
But either way, you and I both agree, Paper Girls Saga, they're on their own level, right?
Right.
They're
No,
on their own level.
this is
Yeah.
very, very good. If anyone else wrote this, I would be tuned into everything else they're doing. Since it's Brian K. Vaughan, I'm
That's a good
already
point.
tuned into everything else they're doing.
Yeah. If this were an unknown writer and you read this book,
Yeah.
you'd be like, ooh, what else have they got going on?
Which I think was the case when this came out.
Probably so. Yeah. As at this point,
This is entry point
people,
to Brian K. Vaughan.
yeah, people would have read, they would have known him from, if you were a DC person, you would have known him from his time. He would have written some Batman stuff and some various DC stuff for hire. Obviously, he would have already done Runaways over at Marvel, and some Marvel work there. And he would have done Y, and he would have done, I believe, Pride of Baghdad. Don't know if that would have been out, but he would have done Y. Y the Last Man would have already come out and been out there, the book with Pia Guerra. So that would have already gotten him some level of critical and commercial acclaim before this book came out. So this book would have been on the heels of that, and people would have known him from that. And he would have had a bit of a name already, especially if you were a DC Vertigo guy reader at that point. You would have known who he was when this book came out. But I think then this compiled with Y, and then his other DC work, his work, he kept stacking things pretty much until Saga came out, and then Saga blew the doors off the thing.
Right.
You know, that took him, I think, to another level of writer, where, because that's the kind of book that brings in quote unquote non-comic book readers, you know,
right?
Because it's a fantasy story. It's not superheroes. It's not like, you know, and even a book like Ex Machina, I'm sure on some level there are people who would be alienated by the political aspect of it, you know, people who just don't want that. So there's even that kind of bar there. But Saga is the book, I think, that takes him to another level as a creator, that basically, I think, allows him to forego all for hire work. Like, I think at this point, you know, by the time he's finishing up Y and doing Ex Machina, I don't even think he has any other, I mean, maybe some spot things here and there, but he wasn't doing a lot of for hire work at that point. At least he wasn't doing long runs of stuff. You know, so maybe a little bit here and there. And then Saga takes it to another level. So if you were reading along at the time and you had read Y, you would have been aware of Ex Machina, you know, but it's still, I do think in the canon of Brian K. Vaughan books, creator-owned books, I think this is one of the lesser read ones. I really do.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because it didn't get an adaptation, you know, whether or not you
like the messy publishing history a little bit. It's like, you start on Wildstorm, you end on Vertigo. Yeah. It's like, you know, if you're reading it at your comic shop was not going to be confused by the publication history. Yeah.
But
if
getting
you're
it now,
picking it up in trades later, especially before the big collected editions came out, it was probably confusing and felt like a little bit of a chore to track it all down.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is kind of the lost one because it doesn't have the outside acclaim. You know, everyone knows Saga. So again, whether or not you liked the Y the Last Man TV show, and you should because it's terrible, but that had an adaptation, it had a lot thrown behind it. It bombed because it was terrible, but there's an outside awareness of that story, and people know, oh yeah, that's the story with the dude and the monkey and all the guys died. It's a bunch of women. Like, people know the premise of that story. Ex Machina got swallowed up by the Alex Garland film. Like the name
Yeah.
Ex Machina, like it got swallowed up by that movie. Because that movie is so memorable and is so well done. So I think that there's also there's just a lack of brand recognition and awareness for this specific book because something else came in and effectively stole its thunder, because you
Right.
search Ex Machina, and I'm going to guess the movie comes up first. Like you have to put an Ex Machina comic, I'm pretty certain, in Google.
Oh, yeah.
In
Or
order to
Brian
get,
K. Vaughan, yeah.
yeah. Just searching Ex Machina gets you the movie and the Latin phrase, so you have to work to get to the comic book at that point.
Yeah. But the work is worth it. I do think it's worth reading. I do commend this to people to read. And I do offer, I guess, trigger warnings about language, not so much content. Like, I don't think it's excessively violent. It's not overly sexual.
Language and throughout too. I mean, even through the end of this last volume. I mean, it's consistent in its use of the language of the time that we no longer deem acceptable. Right. But like at no point was there a shift of like we shouldn't do it this way. It was they were pretty committed to the bit.
Right. Well, that and it's like, even if you had a change of heart about it, you can't just suddenly change the way all the characters talk.
Yeah.
They're still writing. Gotta see it through.
Yeah, they're writing close of the times of a time in the recent past for them as the books are coming out. So they are staying true to the way society functioned and the way society just kind of was back then. 15, 20 years ago, just how it was.
Yeah. Anyway. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for reading along. I hope you enjoyed it. And we will be back next week with a new Creator Spotlight for another new series that we look forward to reading. So please like, subscribe, share it with a friend, give us a 5-star rating, and join us next week for another book.
Peace.